Roger Mark de Souza is Director of Population, Environmental Security and Resilience for the Wilson Center's Environmental Change and Security Program. He joins us today to discuss a report commissioned by the G7 members entitled A New Climate for Peace. Roger Mark, welcome back to Now. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
Reading from, before we get into the details, let me just backtrack and ask you about the process and the purpose. Why was the report commissioned? What is it intended to do?
So the German Foreign Ministry is working with us and a number of partners in Europe as Germany assumes the presidency of the G7. And the German government, along with our European colleagues, have recognized that this is a critical issue that we at the Wilson Center have been working on for quite a while in partnership with them and with USAID and the State Department. And so the German Foreign Ministry said, we'd like to understand this better to be able to take it to the G7 member countries to have an informed discussion about what this means and what are the policy implications. So they commissioned this report so that they can set some direction for the G7 on questions around climate, fragility, and resilience.
And you were one of the contributing authors.
Yes.
Who else were you working with?
So we were working with partners in Germany, Adelphi. We were working with International Alert out of London and partners from Paris and the general members of the G7.
Okay. The first words in the executive summary: climate change is a global threat to security in the 21st century. We must act quickly to limit the future risks to the planet we share and to the peace we seek. Sounds pretty urgent. Is that? I'm guessing that's not an accident.
It is very urgent right now. We are seeing increasingly that these issues are coming together. We have a number of case studies in the report that highlight where we see peace and climate and conflict coming together as a real urgent issue. And it's a pivotal moment right now because this is being discussed in a number of international fora. So we have the G7, we have the climate conference in Paris in December, and we have the rollout of the International Sustainable Development Goals. And just last month, there was a discussion, an international conference on disaster planning and what it means globally. So there are a number of international conferences that is setting the agenda for development, peace, security, and climate for the next 5 to 10 years. So now is the time.
Can you give us one example of a situation on the ground where that requires this kind of urgency?
I would say we most recently saw that in a country like Mali, there was a coup d'etat, and this was in 2012, and there were factors tied to drought and climate change impacts, that led to instability and made the population rise up. And we're seeing examples of this kind of uprising and instability tied to natural resources and climate scarcities and fragilities throughout the world.
Have people, do you think the general population, when they think about climate change, has made this transition from images of polar bears on ice floes to countries with uprisings and coups taking place because of the related problems created by climate change?
I don't know that the general public sees it in that way, but I think folks living in those situations experience it firsthand. I think policymakers recognize that this is a dimension that is important. We see that peace building offers an opportunity to address these issues, and the report specifically talks about a set of compound risks that tie to climate change and fragility. And these are risks around local resource disparities, livelihoods, extreme events, sea level rise, migration, food security.
You know, one of those, number 7 of the list, really caught my attention because it's not one that you think about. It's a warning of unintended consequences, essentially. I think the language you use is unintended effects of climate policies. Explain that one.
So very often we are well-intentioned and design policies around climate change mitigation and adaptation that may have adverse effects. This is sometimes what we call maladaptation, and a community, for example, may be displaced because of a policy or program put in place to address climate change impacts. What we want to do is make sure that there is greater coordination collaboration across sectors and planning so that we see these unintended consequences of climate change
you don't create
programs
a problem
and
while
policies.
trying to fix one.
Exactly.
Yeah, you know, I'm hearing the Carly Simon song "Anticipation" in my head, because when I think of the early warning and assessment part of the report, how good are we at anticipating what these types of problems might be?
But you know, it's a very dynamic process. We know that there are certain hotspots in the world, so we have a focus on the parts of the world where we know these events can happen. What's more difficult to determine is what will be the trigger, what will spur an event that would make it devolve into conflict. So more and more we're looking closely at monitoring these situations and determining what can be done ahead of time in anticipation to prevent the event from escalating. The problem is, how do you measure something that does not happen? That's the challenge.
Yeah, I'll say.
Yes.
So the report says explicitly that the problems and the potential solutions related to those problems are not all within the purview of the G7. So what is this? The G7 attempting to provide the leadership that needs to occur for there to be some sort of global coalesced effort?
I think that's a good way of thinking about it. It's the G7 looking to play a leadership role in recognizing what this issue means for foreign policies, for example, and thinking about how the G7 as a body can better coordinate among themselves. And when they think of foreign assistance in these hotspot countries, to be anticipatory in addressing some of the potential conflicts and tying it to fragility and climate change so that there are positive outcomes in those locations.
And finally, for those who are interested in maybe not just the executive summary, but the entire report, where can they find it?
Once again, we will be providing references to it on newsecuritybeat.org, and we have a blog post that will highlight some of the results coming out of the report.
Great. Well, thanks very much for joining us.
Thank you.